Hello, fellow teachers, and welcome to Teaching with Power. This is Ben Wilcox, and thank you for letting me be a part of your scripture study or your lesson prep this week. I'm here to help you study and teach the scriptures with more relevancy, impact, and power. And this week, we're going to be digging deep into 1 Nephi 16 to 22. But before we get going, I want to give you some information at the beginning rather than at the end. The best place to go for all things Teaching with Power is really easy to remember. teachingwithpower.com. It's just a simple landing page with links to the YouTube channel with all my videos, the blog where you can find the lesson plans based on the videos, and the Etsy shop where you can purchase the handouts and the slide presentations if you're interested. And one more quick thing. This past week, there were some really awesome comments where viewers shared their insight on different verses and ideas that I didn't mention in my lesson. I want to encourage that. I think it's great. That way, not only am I teaching you, but you're teaching me. That is one of the things that I love about teaching. I learn new things as well from my students. So this week, I want to invite you to share just one thing that you learned from your scripture study or lesson prep that I didn't teach, and then add it in the comments below. That way, everybody can benefit from everybody's perspective. It'll make this a little more like a classroom. But with that said, let's get started. For an icebreaker, a discussion question. Have you ever been lost? And what happened? And if you ask a class that question, you're likely to get at least a few interesting stories. Me, I have been lost before. I once got lost in a cave with some friends when I was in college, and we hadn't brought a map or any extra batteries for our headlamps. I know, really stupid, right? But eventually, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but we were rescued by none other than a pack of Cub Scouts. So now that I'm older and wiser, as a backpacker, whenever I venture away from the trailhead, I always bring a printed map, a compass, and then I use a GPS app on my phone that tells me exactly where I am, and a downloaded track of the trail that I want to follow. And boy, does that ever make a difference. That kind of guidance really gives me confidence to travel deep into the backcountry and far from civilization. It takes a lot of the risk out of wilderness travel. And in the story of Lehi's journey to the Promised Land, we have a group of people traveling through a wilderness. And in His infinite mercy and wisdom, God provided them with guidance. And that guidance came in the form of a special sacred object. Do you remember what it was called? That's right, the Liahona. It's not called the Liahona in 1 Nephi. We don't hear it called that until Alma tells us in Alma 37. But we know what it means. Liahona in Nephite means compass. The Lord gave them a compass. And here we begin what I refer to as the 3 B's of 1 Nephi. And they're in chapters 16 and 17. Can you name them all? You've got the ball, or the Liahona, the bow, and the boat. The ball, the bow, and the boat. That's where we're going to focus our attention today. And we're going to start out with the ball. A really great activity to do with the story of the Liahona is to have your class members look for and mark every description they can find of the Liahona, what it looked like, what it did, and how it worked, and make a giant list of all those things. I've actually put together a handout you could use that points out the verses where you can find these descriptions. Here's what it looks like, and I'll make that available for download at my Etsy shop. And by the way, I've decided that if you ever purchase the slides for these presentations, from here on out, I'm going to include any handouts in that download as well. But they'll still be available separately too. But if you do this activity, here is what you're likely to find. Lehi found it right in front of his tent door. It was a round ball. It had curious workmanship. It was made of fine brass. It had 2 spindles, and one of those spindles pointed the way to go in the wilderness. It gave them directions. It led them to the more fertile parts of the wilderness. It worked according to their faith, diligence, and heed. There was writing on it that was plain to be read, and it gave them understanding. That writing changed from time to time, and it was described as being a small thing that brought about great things. It showed them where to obtain food. And here we're going to jump to Alma chapter 37, where Alma gives us a lot more detail about the Liahona. It was a compass. The Lord prepared it. It showed them their course through the wilderness. It worked according to their faith. It was the source of great miracles. It didn't work if they were slothful, unfaithful, or not diligent. Not following it led to affliction, hunger, and thirst. And finally, they didn't prosper if they were slothful to give heed to it. Now here's the cool part. The Liahona was never meant to be a mere tool to help Lehi and his family to get to the promised land. God always intended it to be a symbol and a metaphor as well, an ancient object lesson, if you will, to teach them and us an important lesson. And we know this because of Alma chapter 37, verses 43 through 46. And can you find the two words that Alma uses that mean the same thing as symbol or metaphor in these verses? The first one is in verse 43. He says, "These things are not without a shadow." And in verse 45, he asks, "Is there not a type in these things?" Shadow, type, symbol, metaphor, they're all the same idea. So what is the Liahona a symbol for? See if you can pick it out. "And now, my son, I would that you should understand that these things are not without a shadow. For as our fathers were slothful to give heed to this compass, now these things were temporal, they did not prosper. Even so it is with things which are spiritual. For behold, it is as easy to give heed to the word of Christ, which will point to you a straight course to eternal bliss, as it was for our fathers to give heed to this compass, which would point unto them a straight course to the promised land. And now I say, is there not a type in this thing? For just as surely as this director did bring our fathers, by following its course, to the promised land, shall the words of Christ, if we follow their course, carry us beyond this vale of sorrow into a far better land of promise. O my son, do not let us be slothful because of the easiness of the way. For so it was with our fathers. For so was it prepared for them, that if they would look, they might live. Even so it is with us. The way is prepared, and if we will look, we may live forever." So what's our Liahona? The word of Christ, or the scriptures, the words of the prophets, God's truth. It's all those things. But for the rest of the lesson, I'm going to just focus on the scriptures as being our Liahona. But realize it could mean all those other things as well. But to me, the scriptures are our compass that leads us through the wilderness of life to our promised land. They point me in a straight course to eternal bliss. They bring me ever closer to a far better promised land beyond this vale of sorrow. And if I but look to them, I will live, and I'll live forever. So now's the fun part. Let's go back to our Liahona chart and substitute the Liahona with the scriptures and ask, how do the scriptures fit each of these descriptions? And now you just pick whichever ones you want and think of how they match that description. It's really fun. I love the insights that I've gathered over the years from my students. And I'll give you some of my thoughts. Lehi found them right in front of his tent door. Well, the scriptures are right in front of us. We don't have to go too far to find them. They're easy to get our hands on. So be careful not to get slothful because of the easiness of the way, as Alma warned us. It was a round ball. I'm not as sure about this one, but I know that the circle is usually symbolic of eternity. The scriptures remind us that the course of the Lord is one eternal round. It was of curious workmanship. This tells me that the Liahona was obviously not man-made, just like the scriptures. They aren't from men or from the mind of men, but from God. Fine brass. It was well made, beautiful, shiny, and solid. The Scriptures are sound. They're beautiful. They reflect God's light, and they're precious, of great worth. It had 2 spindles, and one pointed the way to go. And I really had to think about the 2 spindles idea. If there were 2 spindles, and the one pointed the way to go, where did the other one point? My theory, it pointed true north. Like Alma tells us later, it was a compass. A compass points north, which is helpful in keeping our bearings, but how nice for Lehi and his family. Not only might it have told them where north was, but the way that they should travel in relation to north. What a cool symbol for the Scriptures. They help us to know the eternal, unchanging doctrines of the gospel, the true north of the truth. And they help us to navigate our lives in accordance with those principles. They help us to keep our spiritual bearings and how to travel through the wilderness of life in relation to them. They give us directions. They lead us to the more fertile parts of the wilderness. Life is still a wilderness for all of us, but some portions of that wilderness are better than others. The words of Christ help keep you in those areas. The Scriptures are only going to work under certain circumstances. Faith. If we don't believe that they can help us, they won't. Diligence. If we aren't diligent in studying them, then they're not going to do us any good. And if we don't give heed to what they teach or apply their lessons to our lives, then they become just a nice book of stories. But if I give heed to them, they're going to lead my life in the right direction. The writing was plain to be read. The writing of the Scriptures plainly teach us the truths of the gospel. They give us understanding. The words changed from time to time. I really like this one. Certain verses and stories can mean one thing to me at one point in my life, and then teach me completely different things at another point of my life. Their meanings can change depending on our circumstances or our time of life. The Scriptures are meant to guide us for a lifetime. Certain verses that I read when I was a teenager meant something completely different when I was a missionary, and now even something different as a father and husband. It was a small thing that brought to pass great things. The Scriptures may seem like a small thing, but boy, do they ever make a difference when used the right way. They can bring great things into our lives when heeded. It showed them where to obtain food. The Scriptures can help us to know where we can be spiritually fed. We're instructed to feast on the words of Christ on a daily basis. We already discussed how it's like a compass, but we know that the Lord prepared the Scriptures, not man. They show us our course through the wilderness. They only work according to our faith. If we have faith in them, then they're going to have a miraculous impact. But there are consequences when we don't use them the right way. When we're lazy and unbelieving, we don't see the marvelous works that come from them, and we may get lost on our journey. Maybe we'll stall and tarry in our progress. We'll run to and fro, wondering what we should do. We'll find ourselves afflicted by the dangers and the dreariness of the wilderness. And finally, we won't prosper spiritually. So before we move on, a final question. When have you seen the Scriptures fit one of these descriptions in your life? And how? And I promise you that the words of Christ will lead you through this often dreary wilderness of life. The Scriptures have been my guide, my compass, my celestial GPS. I admit that there have been times in my life where I felt lost, and the Scriptures have guided me through the rocky terrain of trial and the thick overgrowth of doubt. I remember feeling lost as a teenager, and 2 Nephi 31 showed me the way to go. I remember feeling lost as a missionary, and Jacob 5 showed me the way to go. I remember feeling lost as a parent, and Enos showed me the way to go. And I remember feeling lost as a new bishop, and Mosiah chapter 2 showed me the way to go. The Scriptures are our compass. So my advice to you, just like your Little League coach used to say, keep your eye on the ball. Keep your eye on your liahona, the Scriptures. Now the second B, the bow. I love this story. And for this one, I would do an object lesson. And what you need for this is a transparent jar of dry beans or popcorn kernels and a ping pong ball. Here's the one that I use. It's a big one, but it still works just fine with a smaller mason jar if you'd like. I start by showing them the ping pong ball and saying that this represents them. Then you put it in the jar, screw the lid on, and say, have you ever felt like life did this to you? And then I turn the jar upside down and thump it down on the table. Everybody nods in agreement. And I ask them, have you ever felt like everything just came crashing down around you? Like the weight of the world landed on your shoulders? Have you ever had a day like that? How about a week? A year? What can we do when we feel buried by life's problems, challenges, and misfortunes? Then I just leave the jar on the table upside down like that and tell them that we're going to come back to it later in the lesson. Well, Nephi's going to help us to know what we can do in situations like this. While his family's traveling in the wilderness, they're going to face a huge problem. Can you find what it is in 1 Nephi 16, 18 through 19? And you guessed it, Nephi's bow breaks, which means the family has no way to obtain food, and this causes them to become much fatigued, and they begin to suffer much for the want of food. Have you ever been in similar circumstances? Has something tragic ever befallen you? Have you ever felt fatigued, or have you suffered, or have you ever been in want? Nephi is going to teach us what to do when the bow breaks, so to speak. And the rest of his family is going to teach us what not to do when the bow breaks. What we're going to do is observe two reactions to the problem. And here I'd assign half of you to look at one reaction and the other half the other. You're going to read the following verses and then answer the accompanying questions. So group number 1, 1 Nephi 16, 18 through 22, and then 30 through 32. Find and mark all the words and phrases that describe how the family reacts to the broken bow. And then, did their reaction help? And then group number 2, 1 Nephi 16, 23 through 24, and then also 30 through 32. Find and mark all the words and phrases that describe how Nephi reacts to the broken bow. And did his reaction help at all? And for the first group, what did you find? You could have marked angry, murmur exceedingly, and that word murmur shows up 2 more times. They became exceedingly sorrowful. They hardened their hearts, and there was complaining. And did their reaction help the situation at all? Nope. That reaction had absolutely no bearing on what eventually solves their problem, right? However, what about Nephi? What did he do? Nephi did make out of wood a bow and out of a straight stick an arrow. Then he goes to his father and has him inquire of the Lord where he should go to obtain food. And did this reaction help? Yes, that's what actually solves the problem. Nephi's faith and resourcefulness resolves the situation. So what does this situation teach you about facing life's challenges? Here's what it teaches me. When things go wrong, anger, complaining, exceeding sorrow, and hardening my heart doesn't do me any good. It's a complete waste of my energies. Yes, it might feel good and self-satisfying to throw yourself a little pity party and cry, woe is me, and get angry at God and the world. But does it help? How's that working out for you? It's not even so much bad as it is useless. And here I'll include another brief insight from this chapter. Later in verses 34 through 36, we have another problem arise. Ishmael dies. And how do they react? It says that they begin to mourn, which is a completely normal and appropriate reaction to the situation. But notice what they do next. They begin to murmur against Lehi, and they begin to list their sufferings. They say, "Our father is dead." That's the present challenge. But they don't stop there. "And we have wandered much in the wilderness, and we have suffered much affliction, hunger, thirst, and fatigue." So what are they adding to their present problem? All of their past problems too. But they don't stop there. "And after all these sufferings, we must perish in the wilderness with hunger." So now what do they add? They project future problems and sufferings as well. So now they're suffering past, present, and future problems all at once. Have you ever done this? I think it's pretty common for us to react this way. A student fails a test and they say, "I failed this test." And think of all the tests I've failed in the past, and I'm always going to fail tests, no matter what I do. Or you have a tough month financially, and what do? We don't have enough money to pay all the bills this month. And think of all the financial problems that we've had in the past, and we're always going to struggle financially, no matter what we do. Or you struggle with an addiction, and you relapse, and you say, "I've messed up again. I always mess up, and I'm always going to mess up. I'm never going to get over this." I call this tendency compounding the crisis. And what this approach often leads to is what we see in verse 36. They desire to return to Jerusalem. They want to give up. Compounding the crisis tempts us to resign ourselves to failure. We lose vision. We lose hope. We don't even want to try anymore. We want to give up on our goals, give up on our calling, give up on our marriage, give up on our faith. And it may even lead some to one of the most tragic forms of giving up, taking their own life. I believe that God has given us sufficient strength to face our present problems. But when we add our past trials and project future ones, are we surprised to discover that we feel overwhelmed and hopeless? Nephi shows us a better way. Instead of complaining and compounding the crisis, he gets to work. He's proactive. He recognizes his own power to resolve his problems. He looks around and asks, "Is there anything in my circle of control here? Any possible solution that I can try?" But notice that that's not all Nephi does. The solutions to our problems are not always going to come solely by our own efforts. He includes somebody in his solution, God. He goes to the source of all truth and inquires of the Lord for help. We're not expected to face our afflictions alone. God is there to help us also. These two efforts combined are far more powerful than either one is alone. It's a two-pronged attack on adversity. Proactivity and prayer will always get you closer to a resolution of your difficulties than anger and complaint. It reminds me of this quote that is attributed to Saint Ignatius. Pray as if everything depends on God, and then work as if everything depends on you. So back to our object lesson. And here's where you pick up the jar and you ask, so what do we do when the world crashes down around us? Work and pray. Work and pray. And as you say these words, shake the jar up and down. And this is so cool. What eventually is going to happen is that the ping pong ball is going to rise through the popcorn kernels to the top of the jar. And then I like to make this point, that if you take the Nephi approach, you're always going to come out on top of your problems. And this reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Joseph Smith, a man who definitely understood something about trial and suffering. He said, "If I were sunk in the lowest pit of Nova Scotia with the Rocky Mountains piled on top of me, I would hang on, exercise faith, and keep up good courage, and I would come out on top." So when life conspires to bury you, don't just wallow in the pit of self-pity. Don't abandon yourself to your anguish. Instead, you can be a Nephi. Rely on God's guidance and your own gumption, on God's insight and your own ingenuity. And I'm confident that you'll end up on top of your problems. When life breaks your bow, make a new one, and then inquire of the Lord for guidance. I'm confident that when you approach your problems like this, you're going to obtain the food that you need once again. The third and final B, the boat. And I'm going to be slightly more brief on this one. I feel that a lot of the principles that this story teaches were covered in my rewards and rebukes activity back in the first Nephi 1 through 7 video. But perhaps a quick idea. For an icebreaker, before the lesson and without them knowing, I like to take a dollar bill and place it between pages 6 and 7 of one of my class member scriptures. Then when class begins, I call on that student to come forward with just their scriptures in hand. Then I tell them that I want them to give me $1. Now, they'll look confused and perhaps say that they can't, but I stay persistent and I say, no, I believe in you. I know that you can give me $1 right now. When they express that they still can't do it, I ask them to read 1 Nephi 3:7 and try again. And when they open to that page, they find the $1. And when they give it to you, have them read the verse. And it came to pass that I, Nephi, said unto my father, I will go and do the things which the Lord hath commanded. For I know that the Lord giveth no commandments unto the children of men, save he shall prepare a way for them that they may accomplish the thing which he commandeth them. So then I ask, how were you able to do what I asked you? And more than likely, everybody's going to realize that you put the $1 in their book to begin with. To which I respond, that's right. I prepared the way for you to accomplish it. Therefore, I knew you could do it. Well, the Lord did the same kind of thing with Nephi. Remember how he asked him to get the brass plates? Nephi didn't know exactly how he was going to do that, but God provided a way. He always does. If God asks you to do something, rest assured that you can do it. He prepares the way. And here, what incredibly difficult thing did God ask Nephi to do in chapter 17, verse 8? The answer? To build a ship. Now, this is quite an incredible thing to ask. Nephi has no experience in this kind of thing. Plus, this isn't the hollowing out of a log to float across the lake. He's asking him to build a ship big enough to fit everyone in their families and provisions to cross the ocean. It'd be like God asking me to build a rocket ship to move my family to the moon. I'd have no idea where to even begin. And here, to help you liken the scriptures, I want you to think of one of your build-a-boat commandments. What's something that God has asked of you that you find incredibly difficult to obey? Or something that you may even feel is impossible? I want you to write that commandment down and have that in mind as we discuss these chapters. And let me give you some examples of some build-a-boat type requests. Maybe one of these applies to you. Overcome habits and addictions. Change your lifestyle. Go through the repentance process after making serious errors. Conquer fear. Master talents. Fulfill a difficult calling. Consecrate all that you have to God. Forgive the unforgivable. Love the unlovable. Raise a righteous family in an unrighteous environment. Endure crushing disappointment. Rise from an oppressive, abusive background. Live chaste in an immoral world. And maybe one of the biggest ones that Jesus asks us, be even as I am. And can you relate to any of those? If you can, I feel that Nephi can teach you something here. Take the next couple of minutes and read the following references and find as many truths about build-a-boat commandments that you can. And I'd like to go through them with you. 17:9 through 10. And I said, Lord, whither shall I go that I may find ore to molten, that I may make tools to construct the ship after the manner which thou hast shown unto me? And it came to pass that the Lord told me whither I should go to find ore, that I might make tools. What does that tell you about Nephi's approach to difficult commands? To me, that says that Nephi has no doubt that he's capable of doing this. He's not questioning why or how or what the plans are. He's already starting to figure things out. It's another great example of the proactivity and prayer approach that we saw with the broken bow. He thinks, okay, I'm building a ship. To build a ship, I need tools. To make tools, I need ore. But I don't know where to find the ore. Lord, I need your help on that one. Where can I go to find ore? So, when God asks you to build a boat, get to work on what you can do and seek God's help on what you can't. 17:50 through 51. And I said unto them, if God had commanded me to do all things, I could do them. If he should command me that I should say unto this water, be thou earth, it should be earth. And if I should say it, it would be done. And now, if the Lord has such great power and has wrought so many miracles among the children of men, how is it that he cannot instruct me that I should build a ship? The truth this teaches me, when God asks you to build a boat, remember that with God's help and approval, you can accomplish the impossible. If God asks you to do something, inherent in the command is the ability to do it. Whom God calls, God qualifies. Chapter 18, verse 1. And it came to pass that they did worship the Lord, and did go forth with me, and we did work timbers of curious workmanship. And the Lord did show me from time to time after what manner I should work the timbers of the ship. The phrase, the Lord did show me from time to time, really stands out to me. God didn't give Nephi all the instructions at once. I mean, approach this from a carpenter's standpoint. You don't even start cutting until you have a complete plan. You want to know the end from the beginning. But that's not how God always works with us. As you seek to build your boats, remember that the instructions will come from time to time, little by little. Don't be impatient with the Lord and expect him to give you everything that you want to know about your situation at once. You're going to have to walk and work by faith, but he'll guide you step by step. Verse 3, And I, Nephi, did go into the mount oft, and I did pray oft unto the Lord. Wherefore the Lord showed unto me great things. Great things come when we pray oft. Don't expect to get your answers all at once. We've got to pray always if we wish to build our boats. And verse 4, And it came to pass that after I had finished the ship, according to the word of the Lord, my brethren beheld that it was good, and that the workmanship thereof was exceedingly fine. Wherefore they did humble themselves again before the Lord. If we have the faith to build our boats, to endure to the end of the commandment, then the result is going to be good and exceedingly fine. And now I want to ask you if any of these things have helped you with your build-a-boat commandments. One of my build-a-boat commandments was to serve a mission, even though I was an incredibly shy and unconfident teenager. But I put my trust in God and had a willingness to obey. I got to work and I prayed oft, and with that, God was able to accomplish what I thought was impossible, to make a missionary out of me. Somebody who struggled to share things with my family and friends, let alone complete strangers. So the next time the Lord gives you a build-a-boat commandment, I hope that you'll remember these chapters. Perhaps you can substitute your build-a-boat phrase into verse 51. And now if the Lord has such great power and has wrought so many miracles among the children of men, how is it that he cannot instruct me that I should, and you fill in the blank. How is it that he cannot instruct me that I should serve a mission, forgive my enemy, overcome my addiction, become like Christ? Remember that when God asks you to do the impossible, don't abandon ship. Build your boat. And if you follow Nephi's example, I know and I believe that you will indeed build your boat. Well, we've already taken a lot of time, and there are still 4 more chapters in this section. But I don't like to leave you empty-handed on these chapters either. So instead of giving you a full lesson plan, I'm going to provide you with some simple study questions to guide you through them. I'm not going to go over the answers here, but I will include some of my thoughts on these questions on the lesson plan at my blog if you're interested. My hope is that you can take some of these ideas and build a lesson of your own around them. But I'll display the questions here for a moment so that you can pause and try them out. And that's it for this week, my friends. I hope that it's helped you in your efforts to dig deep this week. If it's helped you in any way, I encourage you to share the channel with somebody that you know. Thank you for watching, and as always, get out there and teach with power.